an honor to be here. I wanted to take a picture because I think in this room are not only LA changers, but there are world changers here. And the Lord is looking for you to come alongside someone somewhere who needs your encouragement and needs your energy. And I want to tell you that even one person in the right place standing up for other people can make a difference. And a community of you moving into a neighborhood somewhere in the world could make all the difference in the world for that community. There may be a youngster in Haiti right now who has little hope, and you may be the person who shows up and stands in the gap and makes their world full of hope. There may be youth in the suburbs around here whose parents are so busy trying to earn a living that they have no time for them, and you could come alongside them and be the person that instills purpose and joy and hope for the future. I know there are children in Skid Row who are struggling, and your love, even coming down once a week and playing in the gym and giving of yourself could make a big difference in their life. And in LA, there are over 1 million people who are insecure about their food. That means they're going hungry. More in LA than anywhere in the U.S., people are going hungry. And you could be a person that makes a difference in that. And if you don't think one person can make a difference, I want to share with you from Ezekiel 22:29-30, the people of the land have practiced extortion and committed robbery. They have oppressed the poor and the needy and have extorted from the sojourner without justice. And I sought for a man among them who would build up the wall and stand in the breach before me for the land, that I should not destroy it, but I found none. And then an example of one man making a difference found in Numbers 11:1-3. And the people complained in the hearing of the Lord about their misfortunes, and when the Lord heard it, his anger was kindled, and the fire of the Lord burned among them and consumed some outlying parts of the camp. Then the people cried out to Moses, and Moses prayed to the Lord, and the fire died down. So the name of that place was called Tahara, because the fire of the Lord burned among them. And I want to encourage you that if you are just and you live for the Lord, He'll come alongside you. Psalms 34:15 says, the eyes of Jehovah are toward the righteous, and His ears are open unto their cry. Many are the afflictions of the righteous, but Jehovah delivers them out of them all. And if you're worried about, oh, Lord, I'm too weak to do anything, what can I do? I want to tell you that when you're at your weakest, and I can personally tell you this, when you're at your weakest, God is the most powerful. 2 Corinthians 12:9-10, but He said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon you. For the sake of Christ, then I am content with weaknesses and insults, hardships, persecutions, and calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. And let me repeat it. When I am weak, God is the most powerful. I can say that from firsthand experience. I was here 35 years ago. Used to be a fountain out there, and I used to throw everybody in there on their birthday. In fact, I changed a lot of things at Biola. I think they dropped the hair code, the dress code, and the curfew after my freshman year. And you can all thank me for that later. But I came to Christ at an early age, but at 16 I was in Mexico, and I was trying to share the gospel with a man who was deaf, who didn't understand my language, and somehow in that moment there became a gleam in his eyes, and he accepted Christ. And I said, Lord, if you can use a weak guy like me to do this, I want to give you the rest of my life. And God has been faithful to take the rest of my life since that day. I came to Biola thinking I would be the next Billy Graham, great preacher, But I stood up in speech class and I passed out against the chalkboard. And I lost a little bit of confidence. That won't happen today. But I decided I'd be a youth pastor because youth pastors can, hang out with young people, play softball, play games, teach the Bible, and you can have an impact. So I became a youth pastor for 5 years, but I found out if you want to stay young, you hang around young people, and if you want to die young, you try to keep up with them. And I tried to keep up with them. Then I became a school teacher, and I was teaching school to a group of youngsters, and the youngsters in the class were not treating each other very well, and they were calling somebody in my class a loser and a nerd and a dweeb or whatever in the 80s. We all called each other. And I thought to myself, if a youngster can't find love in a Christian classroom, where in this tough world are they going to find it? So I went home and studied my Bible. What can I share? And I came across the verses in Matthew 25 that say, at the end of time, the king and his angels will return and will stand before the king, and he will separate the nations, and he will separate the sheep from the goats. And to the sheep he's going to say, come and take your inheritance prepared for me since the creation of the world, for I was hungry and you fed me, I was thirsty and you gave me drink, I was naked and you clothed me, and I was sick and in prison and you came to visit me, and I was a stranger, an alien, and you welcomed me. And the sheep are going to say, Lord, when did we ever do that to you? When were you hungry and we fed you? When were you ever a stranger and we welcomed you? And he will say, whenever you did it to the least of these, I translated it for the kids back then, whenever you did it for the losers of the world, you did it for me. And I shared that with the young people, and I told them the way that they treat another human being is the way that they're treating God himself. And I went home and told my wife that the message was so good I should have taken notes on myself. That was on Friday. I preached the message 6 times. That was Friday. On Sunday afternoon, I'm working the weekend because when you have as many kids as I have, you have to work a lot of jobs. And I was working at the parking ramp. I'm the guy sitting in the booth at the bottom of the 7-story building, and I hear this knock on my window, and I look up, and here's this man, bearded man, missing teeth, long dirty coat, carrying a bag of pop cans over his shoulder, and he says to me, sir, can I have your sandwich? And of course, after preaching that message 6 times about feeding the hungry, what did I say? I said, I'm sorry, sir, but I need my sandwich. And his face drooped with disappointment, and he walked into the darkness and into the snow, and it felt like a hammer came out of heaven and hit me in the head and said, Andy, you didn't practice what you preached. So I hoped and prayed for another chance, and I found that gentleman 3 weeks later and fed him dinner, and then I was asked if I wanted to work at a downtown rescue mission. And I saw it as a chance to practice what I preached. And my failure to practice what I preach led me to now feed over 1 million meals a year. So don't give up when you fail. But I started working at a mission downtown Des Moines, Iowa. I worked there 4 years. I went out on the streets and found the guys under the bridges and walked into abandoned buildings and found guys and offered them help, and they moved in. But then I started finding families, and we didn't house families, so I tried to get our mission to house families. They decided to stick with guys, so I launched a new program to house families with 6 churches, and it grew into a coalition of 120 churches, and we housed 140 families in transitional housing, permanent rental homes, and then home ownership. And I did that for 10 years, and then I felt I'd kind of succeeded and got comfortable, and I'm never comfortable when I'm comfortable. So City of Pasadena, a church in Pasadena asked me to come replicate what I had done in Des Moines, and I saw it as an opportunity to go and do something in LA. I came to Pasadena and made a bit of a difference, but it felt like I was pounding my head against a wall in LA to get people to care about people who are experiencing homelessness. In fact, in Des Moines, Iowa, I was named the Neighbor of the Year, and for doing the very same thing in Pasadena, I was like public enemy number 1. And it finally got so bad that a city councilman and a neighbor and the city planning guy came to my church and said, if Andy keeps doing what he's doing, this church will be at a standstill. You won't be able to put your sign out front. You won't get any cooperation from us if Andy keeps feeding people who are experiencing homelessness and reaching out to the day laborers. So I felt, and I may be wrong, but I felt the church got timid in their support for me. So I did what anybody would do. I ran for city council against the guy that was threatening the church. And it did not have the impact that I thought it would, because I got called in and I was told that pretty much you're done, Andy, by the church. And they wanted to corral my passion. So imagine, they wanted to corral my passion for people who were experiencing homelessness and poverty. So they let me go, and I found myself unemployed, sitting in my front yard, worried about the future. That did not corral my passion, because for the first time in my life, I felt the shame that poor people feel and the struggle that poor folks feel. And it rallied my passion. Fortunately, the chairman of the board of the Union Rescue Mission pulled up in my front yard, and they were looking for somebody with passion to lead Union Rescue Mission. And they offered me the job at double my salary that I'd had to be the CEO of Union Rescue Mission. I say I worked my whole life to end up on Skid Row, and I finally made it. And I've been there 6 years, and guess what was happening as I arrived at the mission? They were just about ready to buy a piece of land and try to move our women and children out to safety in another neighborhood. And it would be a political battle that made the little political battle that I'd lost in Pasadena look like nothing, because we would be taking on the neighbors, we would be taking on a county supervisor who was the most powerful guy in LA, and I was the guy that got hired to do the job, to take on the neighbors, to make our women and children welcome. I want to play you a little segment from the neighbors about how they felt about us moving into their neighborhood, if you could play that.
First, we were told that they were a nonprofit, and that scared me right away because of my past experiences with Los Angeles City's nonprofits. That they were planning on creating a shelter there. Supposedly it was a family shelter, or it was for battered women with children or recovering addicts. It was very unclear at first. So we were already ready to do battle before we had facts. It's been a perpetual pattern ever since I can remember. The city of Los Angeles needed a place to put their trash. They made a land swap deal with Los Angeles County, which is how they obtained the property, which is the Lopez Canyon landfill, and proceeded to bombard the community with their trash. So there was a lot of concern there when we realized that the Union Rescue Mission was in the city of Los Angeles. The instant reaction is after our long fight to close the landfill, that now instead of taking household trash, that they had devised a purpose to dump their human trash next to us.
You can see the kind of trouble we were in. We were going to move our women and children out to a safe place, 3.5 miles from the closest neighbors. But the closest neighbors felt like we were bringing human trash to their neighborhood. It was quite a challenge that we were in, but don't give up on Mike. You're going to be able to see a little transformation happen in the life of Mike as we go along. So we had a big job to do, and we met with the neighbors, and then we met with the city council, or the county supervisor, and the county supervisor said, Andy, you might as well sell that property, because you will never ever set foot on that property with those women and children. And we went back to our office and prayed, and we prayed from Exodus 3 that the mighty hand of God would move the Pharaoh's heart. And forgive me for describing the county supervisor as a Pharaoh. But we prayed, and that was on a Monday. And I'm not kidding you. On Tuesday, a hospital sent a cab. I'm waiting outside the mission for our kids to get home from school with their moms, and they're worried because the bus is about an hour late. A cab does a U-turn on San Pedro, drops a woman off in her hospital gown in the middle of the street, and she starts walking away from the mission in a hospital gown. And I call the police and say, I think I've witnessed a hospital dumping. And I call a staff member, and they run out and rescue the woman off the streets. And the next day, every news media group in the nation and many in the world are at our front door for a press conference because we'd caught on tape an urban myth that hospitals dump patients. And so Kaiser Permanente apologized on the street in a press conference. And the great writer of LA Times, Steve Lopez, shows up to do a story on this hospital dumping. That story played on 60 Minutes, Dateline, Anderson Cooper 360. It played in the movie, and I was in the movie American Sicko by Michael Moore. Yeah, cheer, I know. But it played all over the world. But more important than that, and that brought all the laws against hospital dumping. But Steve Lopez showed up to do a story on that, but he saw me standing at the mission with two little guys. And he said, Andy, how many kids are here? And I said, about 110. And he said, why are they here? And I said, well, they could be out at this beautiful place called Hope Gardens, but there's this mean county supervisor and these neighbors who don't want them in their neighborhood. And Steve Lopez said, I'm coming back to do a story about that. And he came back and he wrote a story, Boy 7 meets NIMBY World, Not in My Backyard World. And he started writing article after article and pounding on the county supervisor and the neighbors. And he was relentless. Finally, they called a meeting and they said, Andy, could you call Steve Lopez off the county supervisor? And I said, yes, but Steve didn't quit. He just kept pounding. Then we needed a lawyer. And a man from Haiti walked up to me during Rotary and said, I hear you have a problem. I can help. And he gave me a card of a guy. And I called that guy. That guy went to meet with the county supervisor, came straight to my office and said, Andy, I just met with the county supervisor, and you will never, ever occupy that land unless you hire this lawyer. And then he handed me the card of a lawyer. And he said, Andy, I was never here. You never saw me. Never mentioned this to anybody. And he left my office. I've never seen him again. We called the lawyer, and he was a guy that worked for the county for 25 years, knew every in and out, and he knew how to beat the county at their own game. And without him, we wouldn't have won. But he actually called me one day, and he said, Andy, there's a fax on the way telling you to cease and desist from moving the women to Hope Gardens, the senior women. But if you move them today before you get that fax, you won't be breaking the law. So move them now. And so I packed up all the little old ladies at the mission, and I got them in the chapel, and I said, you could move today to Hope Gardens. You'll get your own room, your own bath, walking paths, and you'll pave the way. You'll be like the civil rights leaders of yesteryear, and you'll pave the way for our women and children to move. And they got their things together in garbage bags. They jumped in the van. We looked for the sheriff all the way out to Hope Gardens, and he didn't meet us. And we moved these senior ladies in because of the brilliance of this lawyer. We occupied the land and paved a way for the women and children to come a few short months later. Then my mentor told me that if I could just get the churches behind us, we'd win the Planning and Zoning Commission hearing, which was 2 weeks away. And I said, yes, I will do it. But as I left his office, I thought, how in the world am I going to get the evangelical church to get behind a social justice issue against a county supervisor who claims to be a Christian? I had no idea how to do it. On my way to my office, the phone rang. I picked it up, and it's a business lady. And she says, I'm having lunch with Cardinal Mahoney. Is there anything he could do for you? And I said, yes. He could write a letter to the county supervisor, and he could hold a press conference of religious leaders to stand up for our women and children having the right to move to safety away from Skid Row. And sure enough, we had the press conference. In the middle of it, this rabbi is going on and on about the county supervisor and tearing up the neighbors. And I get a call from the county, and it's being played on the radio, and they say, "What did you say about the county supervisor on the radio?" And I said, "I didn't say anything. It was the rabbi." And right then, the tide began to change, and we had hopes of winning. And we ended up at a 6-hour planning and zoning meeting. The neighbors filled the room. Supporters filled the room. They called our kids crack babies. I didn't even tell you about the 34 neighborhood beatings in the middle, not meetings, beatings throughout this time. But it took us 21 months, $1.9 million, and 34 neighborhood beatings, and then a 6-hour planning and zoning meeting, which I can't give you all the particulars of, but it ended with a unanimous decision to let us move our women and children to safety. And they had 2 weeks to appeal, and the county supervisor called and said, "Andy, if you leave the teenagers downtown, we'll let you move in if you'll let the teenagers wait a year." And I thought about it, and I said, "I can't leave William downtown. I can't leave Teresa. I just can't leave the kids downtown, so go ahead and appeal." And our lawyer was very afraid of my response, and our chairman of our board was a little concerned about my mental health. But the county supervisor blinked and said, "Okay, go ahead and move in." And on June 28th of 2007, we moved our first women and children to Hope Gardens. And I'm running out of time, but I want to play you the final video that just shows the contrast between kids and moms on Skid Row and moms and kids out in a beautiful place called Hope Gardens, and just standing in the gap and being weak and depending on the Lord delivered these kids to safety.
We hope you enjoyed this message. Biola University offers a variety of biblically centered degree programs, ranging from business to ministry to the arts and sciences. Learn more at biola.edu.